After the storm that nearly destroyed everything he loved, Jack found himself standing in silence, staring at the reflection of the rain on the glass. He was once a man of success, power, and noise, but all of that vanished when fate tested him in ways he never imagined. Now, in the quiet company of Tu Tien, a gentle woman with eyes full of understanding, Jack begins a new chapter. Their story is not one of perfection, but of healing, of how love, peace, and faith can rebuild even the most broken soul. This is the story of Jack and Tu Tien. From chaos to calm, from pain to peace. Jack once lived a life most could only dream of. He was the CEO of a powerful company, a man respected, feared, and envied. The city lights reflected on his tall glass windows every night, symbolizing victory. But success has its shadows. Behind every deal and every smile, enemies grew quietly, waiting for the right moment to strike. It started with whispers in the boardroom, numbers that didn't add up, rumors about betrayal. And then the night everything fell apart, the authorities came. Cameras flashed. In one brutal moment, Jack's empire turned into dust. The world that had once admired him now looked at him with suspicion. The headlines screamed his name, painting him as the villain in a story he didn't even understand. Tu Tien, a woman who had once been only a distant friend, saw the truth behind the lies. She stood by him when everyone else walked away. While others doubted, she believed. While others accused, she listened. In the months that followed, Jack disappeared from the city. He left behind his company, his fame, and the noise. He moved into a small house on the edge of the forest, far from the chaos. There, for the first time, he found something he never had: silence. But silence can be heavy. It forces you to face yourself. Jack spent long nights sitting by the window, watching rain fall against the glass. Sometimes he felt the weight of his past pressing on his chest. Sometimes he wished the rain could wash away everything he once was. Tu Tien was patient. She never asked for explanations. She simply cooked, cleaned, and spoke softly, her presence filling the empty rooms with calm. Slowly, Jack began to breathe again. Slowly, his hands, once shaking with fear and anger, began to steady. And one day, as the sun broke through the mist, Jack realized something. He did not need the city anymore. He did not need the noise. He had found something greater: peace. The forest became Jack's new world. Each morning, soft light spilled through the glass wall of their small home, painting the room in shades of gold and green. The sound of birds replaced the noise of city traffic, and the rhythm of the rain became the soundtrack of their days. Tu Tien woke early, her gentle movements almost like a ritual. She would prepare breakfast, simple but full of care: rice, soup, and tea that carried the warmth of her heart. Jack often watched her in silence, realizing that peace wasn't found in wealth or success, but in the presence of someone who truly understood you. He started to rebuild himself in small ways. He repaired the wooden fence around their garden. He planted herbs beside the kitchen window. Every task, no matter how small, became a step toward healing. And Tu Tien, always nearby, filled the air with laughter that sounded like music. One afternoon, as the rain poured down outside, Jack sat by the window. The water rolled down the glass in thin, shimmering trails. "I used to think success was everything," he said quietly. Tu Tien looked up from her sewing, her eyes calm. "And now?" she asked. Jack smiled faintly. "Now I think success is just being able to sit here with you and feel at peace." Tu Tien's smile was soft, her eyes glistening with emotion. "Then maybe you finally found what matters most," she said. Days turned into weeks. Jack began writing again, something he had abandoned long ago. He wrote about life, about truth, about the storms that shape people. He wrote not to be read by others, but to understand himself. Sometimes, villagers from nearby towns would visit. They had heard of the man who once ruled the city but now lived quietly among the trees. They expected arrogance but found humility. Jack helped them fix roofs, shared food, and even taught children how to read. The people grew to respect him not for his past but for his kindness. Tu Tien often watched him from the doorway, pride and love in her eyes. She saw how the man who had once been broken was becoming whole again. One night, as thunder echoed in the distance, Tu Tien lit a candle and placed it beside the bed. Jack turned toward her, the golden light dancing on her face. "You saved me," he said softly. She shook her head. "No, Jack. You saved yourself. I just stood beside you." Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the remnants of the past. Inside, the two of them sat quietly, surrounded by warmth and light. The world had forgotten Jack, but he had found something far greater than fame. He had found love that endured through silence, pain, and rebirth. Months passed, and the rhythm of life in the forest became steady and calm. The air carried the scent of rain and pine, and each evening, Jack and Tu Tien would sit by the window, listening to the gentle sound of the water flowing outside. It was a simple happiness, one they had both longed for after years of chaos. But peace has a way of attracting the past, like light draws the moth. One morning, while Jack was tending to the small garden, he noticed something unusual. A dark car was parked at the edge of the path, hidden behind the trees. It stayed there for hours. The sight stirred something deep inside him. Not fear, but an old instinct, the one that had kept him alive through years of betrayal and power struggles. When he told Tu Tien, she grew quiet. "Maybe it's nothing," she whispered, though her eyes betrayed unease. Jack nodded but couldn't shake the feeling. That night, as the rain fell harder than usual, he stayed awake, watching through the glass wall. Shadows moved between the trees. He heard faint footsteps, the sound of a branch snapping under weight. Whoever they were, they weren't lost travelers. The next morning, he found a small object near the fence, a broken watch, but one that carried a company logo he recognized. It belonged to a rival from his old life, a man named Tu Tien, who had sworn revenge after losing everything. Jack clenched his fist. The past he thought he had buried was clawing its way back. Tu Tien saw the look in his eyes. "You can't let it destroy what we've built," she said firmly. "You promised to leave that world behind." "I did," Jack replied. "But that world hasn't left me." He spent the day preparing quietly. He repaired the locks, secured the doors, and made sure Tu Tien would be safe if anything happened. He didn't tell her everything, only that they needed to be careful. That night, as the forest was swallowed by darkness, the sound of rain masked the faint noise of footsteps outside. Jack turned off the lights and waited in silence. Moments later, glass shattered. Two figures stepped inside. Jack moved with precision, not anger. He disarmed the first man easily, forcing him to the ground. The second lunged, but Jack's reflexes were sharp, honed by years of experience. In seconds, the fight was over. Both intruders were pinned down, gasping, soaked in rain. Tu Tien appeared at the doorway, her face pale. "Jack, it's over," he said, breathing heavily. But in truth, he knew it wasn't. The attack meant one thing: someone had found him, and they would not stop until the past was erased completely. He looked out the window at the storm raging outside. The peace he had built was fragile, and now it trembled like the candle flame flickering beside them. That night, neither of them slept. Jack sat awake, his mind caught between two worlds, the man he was and the man he was trying to become. And somewhere, deep in the dark city he once ruled, Tu Tien smiled when he heard the news. Jack's location was no longer a secret. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. It fell endlessly, whispering against the windows like a warning that would not fade. Jack stood in silence by the glass wall, staring into the forest that once gave him peace but now seemed to hide eyes watching from the shadows. Tu Tien tried to continue their daily life, cooking, cleaning, tending to the garden. Yet even her soft laughter could not hide the tension that filled the air. She knew Jack was preparing for something. He spoke little, moved carefully, and every sound outside made him glance toward the door. On the fourth night, a message came. It was delivered by drone, small and silent, landing near the porch. Jack approached it cautiously, picked up the note, and read the words written in careful, deliberate handwriting. "You took everything from me. Now I'll take everything from you. Victor." Tu Tien read it too, her hands trembling. "We can leave, Jack. We can go somewhere else, somewhere he can't find us." Jack shook his head. "If we run, he'll chase us. If we hide, he'll find us. It has to end here." The next day he made his decision. He called an old friend in the city, a man who owed him a favor. Supplies arrived before nightfall. A set of surveillance drones, motion sensors, and a secure communication link. Jack had no interest in revenge. He only wanted to protect what mattered. As the night came, the storm grew stronger. Thunder rolled through the mountains and lightning flashed across the sky, lighting the room in white for a brief moment. Tu Tien sat near the bed, her face pale with worry. "Promise me one thing," she said softly. "If something happens, you won't do anything reckless. Promise me you'll come back." Jack walked to her, took her hands gently, and smiled faintly. "I've already come back, Tu Tien. You're my home now." Outside movement stirred. The cameras caught them first. 3 figures approaching through the rain, silent and deliberate. Victor was among them. Jack turned off the lights, the house falling into darkness except for the soft glow of the night lamp. When the first man tried the door, Jack was ready. The sound of a chair falling echoed through the room, followed by a muffled shout. Tu Tien hid behind the bed, praying silently. The battle was quick, brutal, and wordless. The rain swallowed every sound except the sharp clash of motion and breath. Jack moved with precision, his instincts guiding him. He knew these men were not trained killers but desperate ones. Then, as lightning flashed again, he saw Victor at the doorway, his face twisted with rage. "You should have stayed gone," Victor spat. "You took everything from me, Jack. My company, my life." Jack stood still, water dripping from his hair. "You destroyed yourself, Victor. I just stopped you from hurting others." Victor raised his gun. For a second, time froze, the world silent except for the storm. But before he could fire, Tu Tien stepped out, her voice trembling yet firm. "Enough. This ends now." Her sudden appearance distracted Victor, and that moment was all Jack needed. He moved swiftly, disarming him, and the gun fell to the floor. The fight ended with Victor pinned down, his rage dissolving into exhaustion. Jack didn't strike again. Instead, he said quietly, "Walk away, Victor. You've already lost everything that mattered. Don't lose your soul too." When the police arrived, drawn by the alarm Jack had triggered earlier, they took Victor and his men away. Jack and Tu Tien stood in silence, watching as the flashing lights faded into the forest. The rain finally began to slow. Tu Tien leaned against Jack, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is it over now?" Jack looked out the window at the forest glistening under the soft light of dawn. "It's over," he said, though deep down, he knew the scars of the past never truly fade. But for now there was peace. The kind that comes after the storm, fragile but real. And as the first sunlight touched the wet leaves outside, Jack took Tu Tien's hand and whispered, "Let's start again." The days after Victor's arrest felt strangely quiet. The sound of rain had faded, replaced by birdsong and the gentle rustle of wine through the trees. For the first time in months, the house felt alive again. Tu Tien opened the windows each morning, letting the fresh air fill the room. Jack watched her from the kitchen, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The police came several times to collect statements, but there was little more to investigate. The security footage, the message, the weapons, all evidence was clear. Victor would face trial and justice would finally be served. Still, Jack couldn't shake the thought of how close they had come to losing everything. At night, he often sat by the window, staring at the glass wall that looked out into the forest. The rain stains were still there, faint traces of the night when everything changed. Tu Tien would join him, sometimes bringing tea, sometimes just sitting quietly beside him. One evening she asked softly, "Do you ever wish we had never met Victor? That none of this ever happened?" Jack thought for a moment. The wind whispered through the forest. "If we hadn't gone through it," he said, "I might never have understood what truly matters. The peace we have now, it means more because of what we've survived." Tu Tien smiled faintly, resting her head on his shoulder. "Then let's protect it. Always." They decided to stay in the mountains, far from the city and its noise. Jack transformed part of their home into a small study, filled with books and old photographs. Tu Tien opened a little cooking space by the window, where the smell of herbs and warm soup blended with the scent of rain on leaves. Weeks turned into months. Life became simple again. Soft mornings, long walks through the forest, quiet dinners by candlelight. The pain of the past faded into memory, leaving only lessons behind. But peace, Jack learned, was not about forgetting the darkness. It was about learning to live with it and still choosing the light. One afternoon, while fixing the old porch light, Jack found something unexpected beneath the wooden floorboards. A small box wrapped in plastic. Inside were letters, photographs, and a key with Victor's name engraved on it. He looked through them carefully, realizing these were from years ago, before everything went wrong. Letters between Victor and his family, full of dreams and plans for a future that never came. Jack felt no anger, only sadness. Victor had once been like him, ambitious, hopeful, human. But greed and jealousy had twisted that into something darker. He burned the letters that night, not out of hatred, but to let go of the past. Tu Tien watched the flames flicker in his eyes and knew that a chapter of their lives had finally closed. The next morning, Jack wrote in his journal, "Peace is not the absence of danger. It is the presence of purpose." Time passed and the world outside moved on. News of Victor's conviction spread, then faded from headlines. The storm that once ruled their lives was now just another story among many. But for Jack and Tu Tien, it was a reminder that love, courage, and truth can survive even the darkest nights. Years later, when they sat on the porch watching another gentle rain fall over the forest, Tu Tien turned to him and said, "Do you ever miss the city?" Jack smiled. "No," he said. "The city never sounded this peaceful." And as the rain whispered once more against the window, Jack closed his eyes and let the sound wash over him. A melody of survival, love, and quiet strength. For the first time in a long time, he was not haunted by memories. He was home.